Okay, let me preface this by saying I love Nintendo. I've played on most of the Nintendo consoles and I actually have a few of the handhelds. But what I want to talk about today is the fact that Nintendo are basically digging their own grave, and the worst part is, they're doing it willingly. Let me give you a very brief history of the consoles that Nintendo has made. First off, we have the NES, which had a couple of redesigns, and obviously nowadays we have a lot of fan redesigns, but they don't really count since they weren't actually made by Nintendo themselves. Then we had the Super NES, which also had a couple of redesigns, and the fan redesigns are still going strong to this day. There was also an adapter style thing, which allowed you to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on it, which is pretty badass in my opinion. Next up, we have the Nintendo 64, which to my knowledge retained the same exact design all the way throughout, just being released in different colours and in special promotional ways and all that stuff. And then we have the almighty GameCube, which had no redesigns whatsoever, due to the fact that it was pretty much just a cube and you can't really redesign a cube, other than give it a handle and make it look like a lunchbox. But once again, the only thing that changed about this console were the colours and obviously the special promotional stuff. And then we had the Wii, revolutionary for its time. One design, and a few other colours of course, backwards compatible with the GameCube. Sadly it didn't have a huge game lineup that struck me personally, and it had the infamous waggle that everyone is surely aware of. But overall it was a really good console. However, it could have done with being HD, due to its competition being the PS3 and the Xbox 360, which did have HD. Then came the Wii Mini, which to my knowledge was only released in Canada and the UK, and this thing could basically only play Wii games and had no internet connectivity or backwards compatibility with the GameCube. And finally we have the Wii U, Nintendo's first HD console that uses the new gimmick of having a tablet-styled controller with motion control. However, I have to say, the games that I have seen do look very good. So there we have Nintendo's consoles. Basically, one version for all of them, and maybe the odd redesign or colour change here and there, mainly for those who didn't like its default colour. But other than that, they made the best console they could, and stuck with it. Raking in the cash, and raking in the fans. Business was good. Now, let's have a talk about their handheld consoles. First up, we have the legendary Game Boy, which is, and always will be, amazing. Looking past that greeny yellowy screen, it is a fantastic bit of kit, and some people still even play it to this day. And of course we have those fan redesigns, but Nintendo also decided to redesign it a couple of times as well. The first redesign was the Game Boy Pocket, which literally just was a smaller version and had a slightly better screen. The next version was the Game Boy Light, which sadly only came out in Japan. This was basically a Game Boy Pocket, but with a backlight, so you could finally play it in the dark. And don't we all wish that Nintendo could have stuck with that idea? Yeah, we'll get to that soon. Then came the Game Boy Color, which essentially is just a Game Boy that could play games in colour. It could play all the old Game Boy games, obviously not in colour because they weren't made to play it in colour, and it had its own library as well. And it even had infrared capability, so that meant you could trade your Pokemon over wirelessly. Although, still no backlight. Then we have the classic Game Boy Advance, which sported a new look and could even play the older Game Boy games. Sadly, still no backlight. So you'd have to sit directly under a light like I used to do as a kid, or you'd have to ask your parents to see if they could take you to the surface of the sun so you could actually play that thing. They also removed the infrared, so you'd need to use a link-up cable to trade your Pokemon and all that. But thankfully though, they did come out with a wireless adapter during the Leaf Green and Fire Red period, so I can't really rage too much. And they also made an adapter which could be put into your GameCube, so you could do unique things with specific games. Such as Sonic Advance, how you could use it with the Sonic Adventure 2 game, and swap over the chows and all that stuff. This had only a couple of redesigns, but they were really game-changing. The first redesign was the Game Boy Advance SP, which is what most people own if you ask them if they have a Game Boy Advance. The clamshell design was something that Nintendo would stick to for the foreseeable future. And it also had a backlight that can be turned on or off. Oh my god, it only took 6 years to realise that they'd missed out on a trick. And then we have the very strange and very weird Game Boy Micro, which I never saw anyone have. It was basically a squashed Game Boy Advance with no backwards compatibility, and the fact that the charger was different from all the rest Plus, it was just plain ugly. Now here's where things got screwed up. This is the point where I believe that Nintendo hit the jackpot, but then spent the winnings on trying to win again. Enter the Nintendo DS. No more cartridges, a touchscreen, a backlight, a stylus pen and holder, clamshell design that puts the game on hold and conserves battery life, a microphone, various forms of connectivity that never got used but still, Wi-Fi, a great library of games, and to this day something that still makes me the happiest, backwards compatibility. This, in my eyes, was the pinnacle of handheld gaming. Then a couple of years down the line came the Nintendo DS Lite. A brighter screen, slimmer design, overall just a better version. This is the version that most people have if you ask them if they have a Nintendo DS. Now, this is where things go tits up. This is where I lost track of what the hell Nintendo was doing or thinking. The Nintendo DSi. It had a camera, and it was probably worse than what most phones could pull off at the time. They also added the DSiWare that could be downloaded from the store. And the worst part about this? No backwards compatibility from here on out. Then we have the DSi XL, which is the same exact thing, just a bit bigger, which makes it hard to just fit right into your pocket to take around with you. The whole point of it being portable. But I guess it was made for the old people who just wanted to play brain training. It also cost a shitload more for literally just a bigger screen. Nowadays we have the Nintendo 3DS, which when I first saw it, I thought it was actually a really good idea. I played a game on it and it was absolutely fantastic. Then again, I can see 3D without glasses. Turns out, not everyone can do that. Some people can't even see 3D at all. And in some cases, the 3D gives people headaches. Although there was a sensitivity slider on the side, so in my eyes it was the fault of the user and not the company itself. The price of this was also much cheaper than the DSi XL, so that was much more appealing. But once again, it could only play DS and DSi games, and obviously it could play its own 3DS games. Then we get the 3DS XL. Literally, once again, just a bigger screen. But I guess it's good for the old people who just want to play brain training in 3D. Here comes the kicker. The Nintendo 2DS. The 2DS. No more clamshell. It's much less portable, no 3D, and is essentially just a 3DS with the 3D sensitivity slider turned off. And the hinges basically glued together so it can no longer fold. From what I know, it was made for the younger audience so they wouldn't hurt their eyes with the 3D, and it was also for the people who can't actually see 3D. But why didn't they just turn the bloody 3D off on the slider on the side of the 3DS? The mind boggles. And obviously there is the 2DS XL, which is for the old people who can't see 3D or work a simple slider on the side and want to play 3D brain training in 2D. That doesn't actually exist yet, but I'm calling it. And nowadays we have the new Nintendo 3DS and the new Nintendo 3DS XL, which essentially is just the 3DS, but it has more power so it can play more intensive games. All your other 3DS games, your DS games, and your DSi games will still work, however, no other form of backwards compatibility. Jesus bloody Christ. So many rehashes of the same exact thing, barely any changes. The changes that are made are very minimal and impact gaming in no way. And the main thing that actually makes me rage so much, Nintendo are the only company that are adored by the younger generation, but the older generation still know about them. So parents won't mind buying their child a Nintendo product since they probably had one as a kid. The problem occurs when 1 million DSs come out of the woodwork and every kid across the world begs and screams at their parents for a bit of plastic until they crumble. 6 months later, a bigger piece of plastic comes out and they scream and beg again, and the cycle continues. Honestly, it's astounding that Nintendo can keep pissing their money into the DS. They should just finish with the DS, evaluate what worked and what didn't, and make a new handheld console later down the line. Maybe perhaps in the next few years, not the next week or the next 2 months from now. Nintendo will always be a solid company that makes good games and good consoles for both the younger generation and the older generation. However, if they keep up with their current method, the people will get wise, and they will decide that they don't need a DS. Basically, a smartphone can do what they can do, and in some cases, they can even do it better. Milking a dead cow will do nothing for you. So that's just my opinion on the matter, guys. What's yours? Maybe you think completely differently, in which case, do let me know. But for me personally, Nintendo are up shit's creek, and they're using the DS to paddle their way out of it.